Thank you so much for joining us for our Lunch and Learn on nature-based education. Our speakers today are both deeply involved in Maine's nature-based education consortium. Amara Ifeji co-chairs the NBEC Climate Education Task Force and serves on the steering committee. She's also Grassroots Development Coordinator for the Maine Environmental Education Association's Changemakers network. She is joined by Korah Soll, who also serves on the NBEC steering committee and is founding director of Rural Aspirations. We are delighted to welcome Amara and Korah to share the booming state of nature-based education initiatives in Maine. Next slide. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations work to protect Maine's environment and our democracy by building coalitions, influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. Next slide. A few technical notes for today's event. You are all muted, but we do want to hear from you. You can send questions to me, Kathleen, through the chat whenever they occur to you. You can find the chat by hovering your mouse over the bottom of your screen. I'll keep track of the questions to ask during the Q&A session at the end. If you have any technical difficulties during today's program, you can message Will Sedlak through the chat function for help. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Again, thanks for joining us, and Amara and Korah, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Let me put our show into present mode. And we're going to start today off with Amara.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us speak today. My name's Amara, as Kathleen said. Next slide, please. Great. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Nature-Based Education Consortium, we first wanted to just speak to NBEC's work and talk about the consortium. So the Nature-Based Education Consortium is a collective group of environmental organizations across the state of Maine. And these groups have been doing work on a collective mission of providing equitable access to outdoor learning opportunities for all K-12 youth in the state of Maine, and have been doing so for the past few years now. And this work has really picked up over the last year or so. Next slide, please. And so the way in which NBEC does this, and that is advocating for equitable access to outdoor learning opportunities for youth in Maine, is through creating sustainable statewide funding for outdoor learning for all Maine youth, communicating the impact of outdoor learning to the development of youth, their communities, and the state of Maine, generating support for outdoor learning and for schools, organizations, and communities that are deeply embedded in this work. So as part of what NBEC is doing, one can see that NBEC is extremely youth-oriented and youth-focused. In NBEC's work, NBEC has these task forces, and these task forces focus on different issues related to the mission it's trying to achieve. So there is a climate education task force, a municipal advocacy task force, communications task force. And so these task forces all work to advance NBEC's mission. And all of these task forces have a youth voice, several youth voices. Some of these task forces are co-chaired by youth, and really just centers the youth voice, which is something that I, as an 18-year-old, as a college student, so appreciate, because in living in Maine and just being in such a beautiful state, I so appreciate now, especially where I live, especially since growing up, I really did not really have much of any connection to place with the environment. I lived in the DC metropolitan area, and so this area was very urbanized. I didn't have a lot of outdoor spaces to play with and play in. But another added component to that is that I'm a person of color. And so in that, my mother was very apprehensive to, for instance, let me go out and play with friends because once the streetlights come on, it's really not the most, it's not the most safe time for me to be out. And then to that point, I also grew up in a very low income household. And so when my friends were outside and they were playing in the snow and building snowmen and things like that, I wasn't really afforded that opportunity because my mother couldn't afford like winter boots or mittens and gloves and coats. That's why I really became so truly invested and involved in NBEC's work, because I know how much I would have valued to have outdoor learning opportunities when I was younger, but I didn't really have those. So in advocating for youth like myself to be able to have these opportunities, it really just fills my bucket each and every day to be involved in this work. Next. So there are several initiatives that NBEC is working on this year. And so these initiatives are really, they really stem from the lived experiences of the youth in the task force, of the adults in the task forces, of just the collective network in general, in making sure that all youth in Maine have this have this access to outdoor learning and environmental education. So the first initiative is a storytelling initiative that the Communications Task Force, of which I am a youth co-chair, is working on. So this storytelling initiative was really, it was really born out of the need for stories in this work, especially for BIPOC individuals. We wanted to highlight not only the good stories of, one's first time being able to go to a nature trail, not only the good stories, but also some of the more stark stories, maybe some of the bad stories about how people really didn't have a connection to place, to draw awareness that this is the case, that, another one of NBEC's missions is that it recognizes that outdoor access is really something that is rooted in equity, and it's rooted in inequity. So if people don't feel as though they have even a place for them in the outdoors, that is so something that needs to be highlighted, because it is in highlighting it that it can be addressed. So this storytelling initiative will not only serve to highlight the good stories of just a positive connection to place, but also highlighting these stories that aren't so good, to hopefully address those stories and make people feel comfortable, especially people who historically do not engage with the outdoors, to be able to engage with the outdoors. Another initiative that the Nature-Based Education Consortium is working on is a climate change education initiative, which is part of the Climate Change Education Task Force, which I'm also a part of. I am a recent high school graduate, and so looking back on my K-12 experience, I saw that I had relatively no climate change education, and climate change and the climate justice movement is something I'm so dearly passionate about. And I so would have wished that I would have been able to step into a classroom and learn about the thing that I was passionate about, instead of having to seek outside learning opportunities. And this was also expressed by many of my friends and peers, students in other schools, really all across the state, as can be seen by these youth-led climate justice-oriented initiatives such as Maine Youth for Climate Justice and the Maine Environmental Changemakers, where I work. And so NBEC also saw this need that students have in wanting to be able to learn about the issue that they're passionate about in a classroom setting. Thus, the Climate Change Education Task Force, which is just so centered in the youth voice, it met with members of the Maine Climate Council and said that climate change education is not yet something we see in the council's first line of recommendations that were outlined in June, in early June, I believe. And so because of this, the task force itself actually went ahead and made some recommendations around climate change education and submitted those to the Maine Climate Council. And we actually have a member of the Maine Climate Council on our task force. And from what we are collecting from that member, it seems as though that these recommendations that we have proposed are being very positively received, which is just so amazing, because I know as a student in the public education system in the state of Maine, I would have loved to have had climate change education. So for potentially this to be able to be something that is incorporated in the recommendations to the legislature in December, it just makes my heart so happy, as well as so many other youth who are on this task force as well. And beyond the storytelling initiative and the climate change education initiative, NBEC has a multitude of other initiatives that is working on as well. There is just recently, this past summer, actually, the NatureBased Education Consortium with Maine Environmental Education Association and Maine Outdoor Brands did a webinar about outdoor learning, and really as just a surefire and effective way in which schools can use to reopen their schools, in that having outdoor spaces and being able to navigate around classroom constraints and things like that, really advocating for outdoor education as a way for schools to be able to reopen. The NatureBased Education Consortium, as I said, is very much so collaborative. And so another one of the collaborative projects that it works on is this Teach Me Outside initiative with the Maine Math and Science Alliance, as well as Maine Environmental Education Association, that was really born out of a need of equity. And equity is something I have mentioned, it's something that the NatureBased Education Consortium truly is just so committed to, having equitable access to these learning opportunities, recognizing the inequities in which our state has, and making sure to work hard to rewrite these inequities. Thus, last year, there was a survey that was conducted by the Maine Environmental Education Association and by the Maine Math and Science Alliance. And so this survey was really able to recognize a lot of these inequities in many of the counties in our state around outdoor education, and many of these rural communities, and how there are significant barriers to access to this type of education. And now I'm going to pass it over to Korah so that she can speak to these rural inequities a little bit more.
Thank you, Amara. I think I speak for the whole NatureBased Ed Consortium initiative when I say that we're so fortunate to have such passionate and articulate youth as part of this movement, really hoping to bring nature-based education to all students in Maine. I am, as Kathleen said at the beginning, I'm the director of the Rural Aspirations Project. It's a really small nonprofit organization that supports rural schools. I have been part of the NatureBased Ed Consortium since 2016, and although we aren't necessarily a nature-based organization, a lot of the work that we do with schools results in nature-based education. So to put more of a point to Amara's how she spoke about the access to low-income youth, I just thought I could give you a little bit of data around schools in Maine, just so that you can kind of understand the context, and then talk a little bit about some of the actual projects that we're working on throughout the state. So just a quick overview, there are about 182,000 students in Maine across 267 districts. there are 620 public schools, and 67% of them are considered rural, which is probably no surprise to those of you that are on this Zoom call. They Educate Maine puts out an education indicators report every couple of years, and this is from that education indicators report, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a overview of just how we're doing in Maine around our test scores, and it demonstrates the differences between students who are economically advantaged or disadvantaged. The next, I was having a hard time finding my next slide. There we go. This gives you a picture of high school students. And so you can see the school lunch eligible students are on the left and the non-eligible students in the yellow. And of the 100 students that enter 9th grade, you can see that 16 of them that are school lunch eligible actually earn a 2 or 4 year degree. And on the other side of that, 44 of the non-eligible students earn a 2 or a 4 year degree. And you can see as they enter different levels, there are fewer students who are able to complete those levels of education. And then pretty strikingly, the students who fail to complete high school by age 20 are 50% more likely to have sporadic employment and 7 times more likely to be persistently poor as young adults. This is the reason that Rural Aspirations focuses on rural students. I do have 16 years of education experience working with highly at-risk students in rural districts, and that was sort of the impetus for starting Rural Aspirations. At the same time, you can kind of think about that as not such good news for rural schools, but at the same time, what we find is that rural kids are really connected to their communities. They want to be there in their communities. They feel connected as a part of their communities. They feel it's a good place to grow up. They care about their communities. And as this data suggests, 59% of about 560 students were surveyed in Piscataquis and Somerset counties regarding their aspirations. 59% wanted to live in Maine when they're 30. 68% expect that they're going to live in Maine when they're 30, but only 13% predict more jobs and an improving economy. And so we feel really strongly that if we are able to connect students to the vitality of their communities, then they can become future leaders and stewards of both the natural places and as well as the economic sort of forecast of those communities. So the work that Rural Aspirations does is really balancing traditional school with place-based approaches. And we do that by going into schools and really asking those big questions around what does future vitality mean for your community? That means different things for different communities. You know, the Jackman school system and the Jackman community is very forest products emphasis, and opposed to that is the Greenville school, which is very more tourism focused. So it's really important to be responsive to each of the school and community's needs, and then to have a community dialogue about what students need to be successful as future leaders, and then asking the questions of how we can build school programming to meet those school and community needs. So traditionally, we have found that community is sort of separate from school. And so the approach that we are taking is bringing community and school together to really ask that question: whose job is it to educate our youth, and what roles should we all be taking in educating our youth? So what we do is we offer responsive professional development, and often that is, again, connecting back to place. So we train and support teachers in curriculum development. We identify ways to connect teachers and students to community resources and assets, and we provide opportunities for teachers and community leaders to reflect and refine that work. So we feel really strongly that in order to build a space for nature-based education, teachers really need to understand their sequence, they need to understand their content, they need to understand what student outcomes they're reaching for, and then they're able to connect that to either their community or to nature-based opportunities. Without that, what we find is that teachers will engage in kind of a one-time field trip or a one-time activity and not connect that back into the teaching and learning that's happening at schools. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now at the elementary level is really pulling in those science and social studies standards and helping teachers to see that you can utilize science and social studies concepts as a way to teach reading and writing skills. That takes a lot of time, especially right now in the midst of a pandemic when teachers are kind of working on balancing, balancing what they have had as traditional education with kids in the classroom as well as kids remote, and all sorts of sort of restrictions. And so the work that we're doing is we're hoping that teachers see this as the work and not additional work, right? So if they can see this as beneficial to their future and to the student outcomes, then they're more likely to engage in the work. So I pulled out a couple of examples that most closely connect to nature-based education around our work that I wanted to highlight. One of them is relatively new. In the spring when COVID hit, there were a couple of outdoor education teachers that reached out to me and said, what are we going to do when we get back into school with all of these restrictions? We're not quite sure. Another teacher reached out and said, I have this outdoor education class, but I'm not really sure about the sequence of that. And so we pulled together teachers from Katahdin, East Grand, East Millinocket, and Greenville. And we essentially developed shared curriculum. So we spent 2 days over the summertime really looking at the sequence and trying to think about what is it that you want students to learn through this experience, and then what are opportunities in the future that we could potentially bring these students together to collaborate, to work on survival skills, to work on hunter safety, to think about wilderness first aid or first responder, but also to think about credentialing those skills. So at East Grand, they have a really strong outdoor education program, as well as East Millinocket. They've been running for many, many years. The goal of those programs is to have students graduate with the skills that they need to sit for their recreational Maine guide license upon graduation. So the students are really motivated to participate in these types of classes where they may not necessarily be as motivated to participate in their traditional classes. So again, that balances that traditional with that place-based, really giving kids an opportunity to see that connection, the relevance and value in their education every day. So right now we have over 30 students that are participating in this program, and we're really excited to support these teachers. At Greenville, it's a relatively new program. At Katahdin, it's also a relatively new program. So we are supporting those new teachers with veteran teachers, and also partnering with the University of Maine to think about that early college credentialing possibility. You can see these super smiley teachers up in the corner. This is the East Grand School, which is just an absolutely fantastic, really tiny, tiny school. We're actually doing a project right now called Portrait of a Graduate, where we're looking at community aspirations at Vinyl Haven and Islesboro and East Grand. And Vinyl Haven and Islesboro, of course, are actual island schools. And we like to say that East Grand is equally an island school. It is about 45 minutes down a road where you won't even pass another person to get there. But the teachers are amazing, and they are really connected to their school. So several years ago, there was an organization called Citizens Organized for Rural Education that did a study, and they wanted to know what would happen if the school closed, like what would happen to our community vitality. And what they realized was that within a year, the bank would go, within another year, the general store would go, within another year, the health center would go. And so they realized that the school was really at the core of their community. And they also realized that because of their natural assets, they were wondering, how can we capitalize on those natural assets to increase engagement, increase achievement, but also demonstrate to sort of the whole world, look at how amazing this small school can be in this really small, beautiful community. So they have, Tammy Matula is a part of the East Grand. She runs an outdoor education program there. She's also part of the Northern Maine, the slide before. But she's created a project called Badges of Achievement. They have 100% free and reduced lunch at that school. And so often kids don't have, just as Amara talked about, access to equipment, right? Coming in with the appropriate clothing to work outdoors. So the kids actually earn like a decal and a water bottle for achievement of outdoor skills. And then they work themselves up to earning a backpack with badges. And then they work themselves up to earning their recreational Maine Guide license. They are now doing this program with 8th through 12th graders, and they have 10 students that are a part of the program. There are 30 students in the high school. So we feel like those numbers are pretty impressive. Another program that we are working on is the Maine Forest Collaborative. So this is a collaboration of 5 schools. You can Google it and look it up. There's a website that supports this. And this is really an opportunity to think about getting kids directly involved in community economic development, understanding the natural resource landscape of their forest-placed communities. So thinking about what the economic vitality, thinking about the ecological vitality, and also thinking about the social cultural vitality. And so we develop a curricula and we work students through that curricula so that they're identifying challenges within their community. And then they're working on developing solutions to those challenges by working with professionals within the community that cross over all sorts of career sectors. And so that provides students with an opportunity to see that there is a place for themselves in these communities, professionally, that they can be a professional and stay in their communities, and that there's a wide array of opportunities for those students, whether they're nature-based or whether they're community-based or whether they're entrepreneurial or innovative. So this program really kind of challenges that idea of workforce and thinking about, are we developing workers of the future, or are we developing innovators and entrepreneurs of the future? And if we are developing innovators and entrepreneurs of the future, how are we utilizing our local assets to be able to support that innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit? So you can see that nature-based education really is a result of developing a strong curricular structure in these rural schools. And the work that we do is really starting with that traditional place where people are very comfortable with traditional education. And so really starting at that place and thinking about what is it that you want your students to know and be able to do academically, but also reaching beyond that into the community to say, what do you want your students to know and be able to do so that they are empowered to actively contribute in the vitality of your community? And then bringing those two things together, thinking about the local assets and trying to challenge that traditional approach of learning and thinking about how can we do this in a place-based way or in a project-based way that gets kids outside, connected to their place, and really learning about the world around them, but also learning about how to be sort of part of a solution to some of the challenges that they're able to see in those communities. And I think that that's it as far as slides.
If you want to stop your screen share, I'll take back over.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you so much, Korah and Amara. I'm just blown away by your work and your leadership and your impact on Maine kids and communities and really our whole future, right? We have a bunch of great questions already. Folks can keep sending them to me through the chat. But first, our Lunch and Learn regulars know that this is the part of the program where we share a call to action. And it probably felt pretty clear through Amara and Korah's presentations that this is work that needs the support of our communities. So this is a call for each of us on the program today to get involved in being a local advocate for nature-based education, find out what's going on in your community schools, offer support to individual teachers who need it more than ever right now, get involved in district level conversations, and you can go right to the Nature-Based Education Consortium for information on how to do that. We will send out the link to NBEC later this afternoon with our follow-up email. While you are making a plan to get involved in the life of your community, don't forget to make a plan to vote. We actually have a couple of polls to see where we all are in that. So go ahead and let us know. What is your voting plan? Have you already voted and how? And tell us these secure drop boxes. It's kind of a new thing for me. Did you use one to vote? While you're responding to that, I will let you know that there are still plenty of ways to get involved in getting out the vote for the election, which is now a shocking 10 days away. We're almost there, guys. It's the final, we can't take our foot off the gas yet. So let's get out there and vote. It looks like almost half of us on the call today have already voted by mail. Another quarter or so have voted in person. Some of us are still planning to vote in person early. You can certainly do that. And some folks are going to get out there on election day with a mask and hit the polls. Let's show those results. Pretty much split on the drop boxes. I dropped my ballot in the secure drop box outside of my town office, and it was pretty exciting, I have to say. All right, let's talk about nature-based education. I was just really struck, Korah, and the data that you shared about how central our schools are to community vitality. That feels kind of equal parts duh and transformative, right? In the way, particularly when we think about the investments that we make in education. How can we lift that up? How do we get that message out more broadly?
The message that schools are essential to the vitality of communities?
Yeah, just how central. I mean, again, this is kind of a puzzling one because it feels so obvious that we shouldn't have to tell people, but clearly we do.
I mean, I think we can do it by continuing to do the work in these schools and in these communities, right? To host conversations between community and school and provide people an opportunity to talk about the future vitality of their community, and then to think about the role of education in moving a community towards that future vitality. There's often like an economic development team or a community development team in a community, and then the school is sort of separate from that. So can we bring those two together to really to have a collaborative conversation about the future of communities?
Perfect. You both talked about some programs that are really successful at the high school level. Can those be adapted, or how are those being adapted at the elementary level?
So at the East Grand School, that's a K-12 initiative. I'm also
Okay.
working with the Katahdin Elementary School and several other elementary schools. It's essential to bring a K through 12 picture to a community rather than focusing on a 9 through 12 or a 6 through 8, but really thinking about that K through 12 scope and sequence and what is it that we want students to know and be able to do? And then how are the skills, how do we develop those skills at each of the different developmental levels? And science and social studies has been really difficult for rural schools because math and English scores are really important, right? And that sort of tells the story of the proficiency of a school. And so bringing that science and social studies in as a platform to really help teachers to see that there are ways to work through literacy skills and work through math skills as you're working on that. Kids tend to be more engaged in science and social studies topics. And so can we use those topics to really build those foundational skills?
Yeah, and if I could add on to what Korah said, I can frankly only speak to like my experiences. So in high school, I said that I self-sought these environmental learning opportunities, and so through that, I was the president of my school stormwater management and research team. And so what we would do is we would go out, we would go sampling, and to ensure that my local watershed, the Penobscot watershed, was in fact safe for the community. But I saw that there was a lot of teachers in the middle schools and elementary schools that were also part of my school district who were really interested in our work. And so we could not have elementary and middle school students go sampling in running water. That was something we couldn't do. But what we could do is that when we collected these macroinvertebrates, which are basically just the little critters in the water, the insects, we could have the kids analyze them. And because kids are fascinated with bugs, they can look at them for days. So I think that that's also something. No, kids can't do one part of the environmental learning opportunity, but they can do a similar aspect of it in a way that they're still being enriched in being able to carry it out. And I also would like to speak to the point that I think it's just so valuable, this like mentor-mentee relationship that the middle school students and some elementary school students, as well as the high school students, were able to foster. I think it wasn't just, I think it was rewarding for the kids, yes, but I think it was more rewarding for me to be able to learn from such young kiddos and to see their eyes light up. So I would say that that is something that's just so important and something that I think should be explored in these school districts.
That was exactly where my brain was going as you were describing those ways for the youngers to get involved, is that there's so much richness in those peer-to-peer, but slightly different age group relationships. So it's great to hear that was your experience. Are there, what kind of funding is available to support these programs, or is that question kind of coming from an old way of thinking? Is this work that we can do without a lot of additional funding? What do you think?
Amara, you want to talk about the MEEA grant?
Yeah, so the Maine Environmental Education Association to commemorate the day in which, we honor our teachers and just all the work that we do. So 2 weeks ago launched a mini grant for environmental education for teachers to be able to use to seek out maybe professional development, to get equipment and things of that sort. And so we received, frankly, 100 applications, which it was only open for 2 weeks. And this is a very challenging time that we're in with the pandemic, as well as just this fall and navigating around the new start of this school year. So to have received 100 applications in this very short time frame with everything that's going on really speaks to the need for funding in this work that we're doing. Educators, teachers alike, students, they want to be involved. And I think that in seeing that there was hundreds of applications, hundreds of interests, it really shows that there's such a need for funding in this work. So yeah, there's a need. I think that's what that highlighted. And Korah, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I would just like to say that Maine foundations have been really generous in supporting the NatureBased Ed Consortium movement, bringing these groups of organizations together. But I would say that it is also really important for communities to make that investment in their own development. And so, every school has professional development funds, and some schools choose to use those in thinking about how can we enrich or build or develop curriculum in a way that expands opportunities for students. And so we do a lot of our work is really in thinking about what's the commitment from the district, but also can we find additional support from foundations that will support and enhance that work. When I think in my own experience, 16 years working in schools, we get really used to grants coming and going. And so it's important for us as educators to really own that work and to know that that work is ours and that we're building it for the future of our school. And so if a grant is only there for a certain amount of time, then the program is really only there for a certain amount of time. But if you develop that connection between community and the school, and you develop that imperative within the community and within the school, then that tends, I think, to stay a little bit longer than just a short kind of grant program.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the difference between an add-on and just fully integrated approach. So the pandemic has pushed a lot of schools to embrace outdoor classrooms. Is that a step towards nature-based education? And how do we continue that? How do we not just go back to normal, but go back to something better?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of funds have been spent this summer and into fall purchasing tents. Some schools have purchased materials to build year-round shelters. So, we live in a climate where, we can be outside all the time if our kids have equipment to be outside all the time, right? And if our teachers know how to manage their teaching and learning outside all of the time. So it's important to couple that infrastructure support with the professional development support for teachers to help them to understand, like, how do you take what it is that you're teaching in the classroom and make that into something that can connect with students in the outside. If we don't make those connections, then teachers tend not to use those outside spaces because they're distracting for the kids, or they're not sure how they're going to get to the outcomes that they need to in those outside spaces. So again, the support for teachers in helping them to develop that curricular link between inside and outside is really essential.
Yeah, just to add to what Korah said, I just really want to stress the point of professional development for teachers. After I completed high school, which was only a couple months ago, but after doing so, I was really looking back on what I learned and, my experiences in the classroom. And I actually reached out to some of my teachers and said, I mean, I just so value what I learned. And, I guess something that I was wondering is, we spent this unit in the classroom, and we looked under microscopes and things of that sort. But have you ever considered translating that to an outdoor space? Because I thought that maybe, doing that kind of unit outside would be best done outdoors. And what a lot of my teachers was telling me is that they did not have they didn't have any kind of professional development in that aspect of how to go from a classroom setting to an outdoor space, how to make that transition, and the best way to do so in which a way that's still enriching, even more so enriching for the students themselves. So yeah, I just wanted to stress the point of professional development as a way to make sure that with this moment that we're in is not a moment, but actually a movement towards continued outdoor education for students.
And the professional development piece is so key, because we're asking teachers to respond to more and more challenges without any additional support, which is really not fair and not effective. But what else do we need? Who else do we need to get on board? Because I can think of parent communities saying, like, are you really learning, or are you just having recess? Or administrators, like, what are the other groups that we need to sort of communicate the value of this nature-based education work to, and how do we do that? Are there examples from the programs that you've helped run, Korah, that or help support, that have been really successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about transparency and communication, right? Making sure that all the stakeholders understand what it is that you're doing. Language plays a really big part in that. Education can be pretty jargony. So there's lots of words around project-based and place-based and community-based and experiential and expeditionary. And so that really is hard for people to understand, and they get lost in that language, not understanding, like, well, that's something else besides the traditional structure of really trying to get through the, the math and the science, the English and the social studies concepts. So it's important to be really transparent as a school about your work and for your curriculum, right? Like, what is it that you're teaching? And then what are the approaches that you're using? And making sure that you're trying to narrow down that jargon, right? So we are a place-based school, or we are a project-based, or we're working on a project-based initiative, or just helping people to understand that language. And then bringing in community stakeholders too, through the Maine Forest Collaborative and also through the East Grand School work. When you put kids in a position of really kind of analyzing challenges, real challenges in their community, and then providing and understanding and thinking about that, understanding the challenge, and then thinking about or prototyping solutions for that, the community gets a different mindset about kids, right? They see them as contributors and as potential solution makers, right? So that's another piece, is bringing the community together to really hear the amazing, innovative, intuitive ideas that kids have when given the opportunity to approach their learning in that way.
And how much more compelling kids can be as messengers than us old folks, right? I mean, I can remember being at a town meeting in my town, where a group of high school kids came and said, now, explain to us why you thought it was okay to get rid of the energy committee in town, because that's not okay with us. And all of those town councilors, they could not answer those kids saying, you need to protect our future. So that's fabulous. Amara, a number of folks were really struck by your conversation about equity and about representation and access, and thinking about outdoor learning and nature-based education as a real means to breaking down barriers. What are the top places that we should be focusing in Maine on expanding the equity and inclusion in our education and nature-based programs?
Yeah, to answer your question, Kathleen, I would say that I would say that I've definitely faced some barriers to access to outdoor spaces, to environmental learning. And I would say that it's not just me who has faced them, of course, but I've noticed that, peers and family members, for instance, I think first to things like nature trails and maps and things like that. I am an immigrant. I'm from Nigeria. And so I found that At the same time that I'm trying to understand, where am I going on this trail, I'm also having to translate as well. This is where it's, going for family members who do not have the best English. So I think that's a thing as well, to be able to have an outdoor space and say, okay, this is our space. What exactly can we do to make sure that everyone can access this space in the best capacity, in the best way? Everyone has the ability to do so. So that's the first thing that I think too. I know that there are, so many languages, of course, but I think of like active translators on trails and things of that sort, guiding people, maybe maps and things in different languages. I would think of, especially in terms of like as a, growing up in a lower income household, it would have been just like extremely so helpful to have programs in which, and I know these exist, of course, I did not know back then, but of having different like equipment. And so like winter jackets and mittens, gloves, snow pants, especially, those are very helpful when playing in the snow, things of that sort, to be able, for kids to be able to access so that they can go out and connect with the beautiful Maine outdoors, not only in the summertime when they have the right equipment to be able to do so, but also in the wintertime when that equipment might not be something that that family might not be able to afford. So I think those are the two things that I think of right off the bat around that. Korah, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think it's also engaging teachers in thinking about the stories that we tell, right? When you work through a history curriculum, it traditionally has had certain stories. So whose stories are not being told, and providing and helping teachers to see that there's an opportunity to help kids to understand the diversity of the world by stretching a little bit from those traditional stories that we've told around history.
And that's a great, one of our participants today shared a resource called the Diverse Book Finder, which is available online. Korah, you sound like you know something about that. Is that something you're familiar with?
I'm not actually, no.
Oh, okay. Well, we can all check it out, diversebookfinder.org, and apparently it's a database of books with BIPOC characters and includes books about nature, farming, permaculture. Might be a good way to expand the stories that we're telling. So I'm definitely going to check that one out. Let's see, we had another question about what's going on in other parts of the state. Some of your examples were from northern rural communities. What about Lewiston? What about Augusta? What's happening in other spots?
So I personally can't speak to that because most of our work is in schools with kids under 300, numbers of kids.
Okay.
Under 300.
So, but we can guess, right, that it's like similar challenges. And we also had someone point out that for a long time, these sort of outdoor education has been maybe a feature of alternative schools or independent schools. So your Waldorfs, your Montessoris, your Friends schools, and how do we, that of course is not always inclusive, and how do we expand those opportunities for all kids?
I mean, I think we have a really good opportunity to think about that rural versus urban. I mean, I guess everywhere is sort of rural in Maine, but thinking about, can we bridge some of those really small schools with some of those larger schools to help to share stories and to help to kind of hear the different perspectives of folks that live in different parts of the state. I think that larger schools have a bit of a challenge in that they, at a small school, you are a department of 1, and that is a challenge, right? But in a large school, you may be a department of 10 or 15, and that presents its own challenges as well. So there's almost a little bit more curricular flexibility in those smaller schools than in the larger schools.
What would be the most helpful thing that all of us on the call today could do to support nature-based education consortium and nature-based learning? What should we do when we get off this call today?
I think reach into your networks, reach out to the teachers that reach out to the organizations that or the community development folks that and just ask questions like, how are you connecting in with schools, or how are you connecting in with teachers, or how can we together support teachers? I mean, I think that interaction between all of us, I think is really the way that we're going to get to a place where we can see that really strong vitality for our future communities.
Yeah. And I would say that this work really starts at home. So if one engages with kids and encourages them to, play outside, to go outside, tell them it's okay to be a tree hugger, and things of that sort, they're going to grow up loving outdoor spaces. They're going to grow up with such a great connection to the outdoors. And because of that, that is truly going to translate into what they want to learn. As Kathleen says, kids will go to their school boards or to their city councils, and they will say, this is what I want to learn. And they'll advocate for that. But they need that passion first. And so building up that passion from a young age is so integral in making sure that kids themselves, of course, are passionate about these outdoor spaces, but also that they're equipped with the tools to be able to go out and advocate for the thing that they want to learn about.
Thank you for bringing that passion to this space today. It is just absolutely incredible to hear the work that you all are doing, and to feel that fire lit for all of us to come help. And it's perfect. It's Friday afternoon now, and we can all go out and get outside and do our own learning. And just so grateful to you, Amara, and to Korah for being with us today. Everyone, grateful to you for joining us. We will email out a brief survey this afternoon, and we really do appreciate your feedback and use it to help refine our program. So take a few minutes to fill that out. If you have enjoyed today's program, we encourage you to join us every Friday at noon for a lunch and learn. Next Friday, Michael Kadebe from the ACLU of Maine will be discussing how we advocate for our priorities in times of crisis. From climate change to COVID and income inequality to racial violence, our country has experienced and is experiencing its share of crisis. So join us next week to figure out what that means for our advocacy work. Thank you all. Have a fabulous weekend, and we will see you soon.